Spirit.
Amen.
Please be seated. As many of you know, we are on a 3-year cycle with our readings. That's right. You know this, right? You know, year A, year B, year C, and we have entered into year C. This is Luke's year. And pretty much as you go through the year, you know, you're going to hear different readings all the time. Now, there are only a couple of times in our lectionary where you will hear the same reading on the same day, kind of no matter what. You know, one is generally Christmas Eve, because let's face it, if you went year A, year B, year C, well, you know, with Mark's gospel, you're not getting a birth narrative. You're just not. Mark is ready to go, shooting out the gate. And Matthew's gospel is not quite as satisfactory, let's just face it, for a good birth story. Luke, well, yeah, there you go. And John, well, I mean, what is this? And it's really only this first Sunday after Christmas we hear, though, this reading every year. Every year you will hear John's gospel, this beginning of John's gospel. Now, I don't know what you know about the gospels, but I'm assuming a lot because I see you all here and I know that you know this, but I'm just going to remind you, there are 4 of them: Matthew, Mark, Ringo, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, there has been some scholarship done on this, and scholars have often said that they think the first of those Gospels that was written was probably Mark. And if you read Mark, you do get the sense of a real immediacy. Almost every other word is immediately he left. And in fact, how Mark's Gospel starts, it doesn't even start with the. It says beginning and goes. I mean, he's in such a rush to write this down and get this information out. He's in a real rush. Which makes for a great gospel if you just want to get the bare bones and you just want to get the story down. Matthew, on the other hand, well, Matthew kind of wants to argue with you a little bit. He wants you to understand something very important about Jesus, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. He's the fulfillment of it. That in Matthew's view, he is Jewish. And this is a continuation of the Jewish story. They are, if you will, almost another denomination of Judaism. Now, one of the problems, of course, with Matthew's gospel is what? Later on, people will use passages from Matthew's gospel that they will pull out, the proof texting, and use to justify anti-Semitism. Not understanding that it's kind of a lot like if we were writing about our brothers and sisters who are the church next door. We still see them as Christians. They just worship differently. So there you've got Matthew's gospel. Luke, on the other hand, he is writing particularly for Gentiles. He's writing sort of in that Roman context. There's an element of he's trying to explain, like, no, this is not a political movement. Please don't crucify me. It's fine. Jesus, he's king of your heart. He's king of your heart. But there's a lot of subversive stuff in Luke's gospel. If you read it pretty carefully, you go, well, wait a minute. What's this little sneaky thing here? Sounds like you are making a comment about the emperor, but shh. And also Luke's is marked with parallels of there's a Jew and there's a Greek. There's someone who's older, there's someone who's younger. There's the new, there's the old, there's a man, there's a woman. You'll see the parallels back and forth, and they'll come right after each other. John, on the other hand, it's just, what is this? For a long time, scholars had thought that John was written much later. So, you have Mark, which could be as early as 40 AD, which, think about that, if Jesus died around 33 AD, could be as early as 40, probably not that early. Then you have Matthew and Luke, pulling from Mark, pulling from some other source, presumably, about 20 or 30 years after that, and then thinking that, well, maybe John came in about 90. But later scholarship, like more recently in the last 20 years, they thought, actually, it's possible that John is written the same time as Matthew and Luke. Now, what does it tell us? What's interesting about all four of these Gospels is to bear in mind that these were not the only Gospels out there, right? Because there was even a Gospel according to Thomas. And if you want what is where the script, the omen came from, that's the one you want to look at. Not really, but I mean, take a look at it. Jesus is pretty creepy in it. I think we've got a good reason why it didn't make it into the top 4. But either way, each one represents the community that it came out of. So Matthew represents a Jewish community that is explaining something about itself and their interpretation, how the lens in which they see Jesus and trying to tell that story for their community. Luke does the same thing. Mark does the same thing. And John's community. Each one has an emphasis. It's kind of like asking the question, if St. Thomas wrote the gospel, how would we write it? You think that might be obvious, right? But how would we write this gospel? What would be the word? Now, if there's a word for Mark, it's immediate. That's pretty clear. Matthew, Messiah, maybe? Luke? I'm not sure, but John's is love. And in fact, you will spend chapter after chapter after somewhat agonizing chapter of John, not going on a linear journey of Jesus, but rather listening to his discourse, talking to his disciples at the Last Supper, and trying to explain why this is so important. And that tells us something about John's community. That while they thought, yes, the story is important, we need to focus on this. Love. So then, the question is again, if St. Thomas wrote a gospel, trying to tell the story of Jesus through our lens, what would our story be? What would be our word? What would our word be? What would we want our word to be? Would our word be hospitality? Would it be fun? Would it be joy? Would it be comfort? What would it be? When we tell the story of Jesus in our lives, in our actions, right here on this little corner as people roll in and roll out of Diamond Head, what's our word? What will our word be for that new year? Well, whatever that word will be, we'll figure it out together.